So let's talk about the first rule of selling. The first rule of selling is always agree with the customer. Now we're going to work on some agreement vocab here, but I want you to really understand that it is always important. There is no disagreeing with the customer. Always agree with the customer. You may have heard that age-old saying, the customer is always right, and that is so true. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the customer will be right about everything, but that does mean that you always agree with said customer. The reason being is if you, what happens in human nature, right, and Psychology 101, is if you immediately disagree with somebody or they say something and even if their objection is not founded in any truth whatsoever and, might just be an objection about something that they're insecure about with the deal or the product, right? You still want to agree with them, because if you dig in, right, and you immediately disagree, even in your vocab slightly, immediately they're going to dig in and they're going to, it's really going to hunker them down and they're only going to be more defensive. So you need to disarm them by agreeing with the customer. Let me give you an example. I sell online courses. It depends. Some of them are, are very, very pricey depending on where some people are, and some of them are more cheap. So when I'm selling somebody on one of my online courses that's a little bit more pricey, a lot of objections that I get are, I can't afford that, or that's way too high, or where do you get off charging somebody that kind of money for on an online course, right? Or how do you sleep at night? Something like that, right? Now, an exercise that I'm going to have you do later on in this course is going to be to write down those specific objections that you get more frequently and then develop a good response for that. But to give you an example of agreeing with the customer that's going to immediately disarm them and why this is important to understand your agreement vocab, right, is let's say I say, okay, the course is $795, right? One payment is $795. The customer says, that's way too much money. What do I say? Do I immediately say, do I immediately try to disagree with them or justify my price point? No, you never justify the price point. You never, work against them and disagree with them, right? What I'm trying to say is the best way to handle that would be to simply agree with them. A perfect example of this would be to agree with a customer that says, that price, I say $795, it's $795 for the course one-time payment. And they say, that is way too high. Now I have two options from that perspective, right? I could try to justify my price and say, well, it's $795, but that's really not that much because it does all these things for you, in which they would dig in and immediately be defensive, and that would work against the sale. Or I could simply, from the get-go, agree with them and say, you're right, $75 is a high price to pay, but, and then I could tie it back into their pain points, which is something else we'll talk about later. So first rule of selling, it's just something simple to understand. Always agree with the customer. So I want you to write down agreement vocab, all of these, and remember to say variations of these when somebody has an objection, especially a customer. You're right. That is a high price, obviously, right? You're right. That sale price is high. You're right. $1,000 for this product does seem high to most people. I already knew that before you did, right? Something like that. Or I'm with you. I agree. I'll work it out. I understand where you're coming from. I'll make that happen. These are examples of agreement vocab. Now, there are not just 6 of them. Obviously, these are just variations and examples of agreement vocab that you can utilize when somebody objects to you. But I just want you to understand, a brief lecture on the first rule of selling, which is always agree with the customer.